Euthyphro takes place outside the courthouse on the day of the trial that ultimately results in Socrates' execution. It's one of Plato's shorter works and details a conversation that Socrates has with Euthyphro on the nature of piety or holiness. The dialogue starts with Euthyphro greeting Socrates and asking what brings him to court today. Socrates replies that he's been charged by Meletus with the crimes of corrupting the youth and refusing to acknowledge the gods of the state. Socrates in turn asks what Euthyphro's business here at court is. Euthyphro explains that he's gone to court to charge his father with the accidental murder of a worker who had killed someone else while in a drunken rage on his estate. Now, this is something that would shock most Athenians. The idea that a man would accuse his own father of murder would have seemed absurd to them. But, nonetheless, Euthyphro thinks that he's doing right by the gods, and Socrates asks why. What could possibly be his justification for this? Knowing all along that Euthyphro, religious expert that he is, would be absolutely thrilled at the prospect of getting to lecture Socrates on the nature of piety and holiness. And so Socrates undertakes to learn from Euthyphro the nature of holiness. Somehow Euthyphro misses the blatant sarcasm in Socrates' words and begins to teach. Now, as Euthyphro starts to lecture Socrates on the righteousness of his mission to prosecute his father, you can almost see the grin light up on the old man's face as he prepares to butt in and start asking questions. Now, what Socrates is about to do is known as the Socratic method of inquiry, or as Socrates calls it, Elenchus. The gist of it is that Socrates starts asking lots and lots of questions. He asks for definitions, he asks for clarification, and then he asks about implications based on what they've already claimed to know. Now, every now and then, he brings in a new premise or idea and asks his partner whether or not they agree with it. The goal of all of this is usually to generate a contradiction, and now usually this results in one of two things. Either a new, more refined definition of the topic being discussed, or Socrates' partner getting mad and leaving. Socrates interrupts Euthyphro, who at this point is sort of rambling, and asks for a specific definition of the quality that makes something holy or pious. And Euthyphro quickly states that what is holy is none other than what is loved by the gods. But this definition doesn't hold up for very long because, as Socrates puts it, there are dozens of gods, and they all love and hate different things, and certainly the same thing cannot be both holy and unholy. The reason that Socrates isn't satisfied with this definition of piety is because he's looking for something very specific in the definition. He looks for something that will belong to everything that is pious or holy, that belongs to nothing that isn't pious or holy, and that has actual explanatory power. Now, Euthyphro agrees with Socrates, but at this point the conversation sort of stalls out because they can't really get anywhere. So Socrates allows, for the sake of discussion, that there could be something which all the gods agree on is good. This leads to Euthyphro's second definition of the holy as what is loved by all the gods, not just one of them. Now, this seems better, but Socrates isn't done asking questions yet. He asks, assuming the gods do agree on something and that they all love a particular thing and agree that it is holy, is that thing holy because the gods love it, or do they love it because it is holy? The implication here is that if it's holy because it is loved, then holiness itself is completely arbitrary and fairly useless. Euthyphro's answer is that this thing, whatever it is, isn't holy because it is loved by the gods. It is loved by the gods because it is already holy. Which I think was just what Socrates was hoping for, because it means that Euthyphro still hasn't defined holiness at all. He said what it looks like, its affectations, maybe even a good way to identify it, but he hasn't said yet what it is that makes something holy in the first place. This is because if the gods love something because it is holy, there must be some quality that makes it holy in order for the gods to love it in the first place. So saying that the holy is what all the gods love doesn't really tell you what makes something holy. It helps you identify holy things, but it doesn't tell you what makes that thing holy in the first place. Here Euthyphro starts to get a little bit flustered, and he starts losing ground. So Socrates steps in to help out his good friend here, and he gives him a new idea to work with. Namely that the things that are holy represent a portion of the things that are just. That is to say that everything that is holy is also just, but not necessarily that everything that is just is also holy. Now, if Euthyphro can identify which part of the just the holy makes up, then we'll have some idea about what holiness itself is. Euthyphro's response is that holiness must be ministering to the gods, which Socrates quickly asks for clarification on. What the two work out is that ministering involves actions which improve that which is being ministered to. But certainly, Socrates goes on to say, nothing we humans do improves the gods. I'm paraphrasing, but Euthyphro agrees that it's more about rendering services to the gods, or prayer and sacrifice. And Socrates proceeds from this point all the way back to the very first definition that Euthyphro started with. The train of thought goes like this. Prayer and sacrifice is asking for and receiving from the gods. A business transaction, goods for goods. But while it's certain what goods we humans get, what could we possibly give the gods that they need? Euthyphro responds, why, certainly it's praise and honor. What is acceptable? Socrates asks for clarification. He says, merely acceptable? The gods don't demand things that benefit them or things that they love? Euthyphro stops him at this point and says, no, it is indeed what the gods love, more than anything. Socrates points out that this is exactly the definition they started with, that they discarded because it didn't actually explain what holiness was. At this point, Euthyphro realizes that he is late, so very late for his court appointment, and that he can't possibly finish this discussion with Socrates right now. And the dialogue ends with Euthyphro leaving and Socrates admonishing him to come back and finish so that he can finish his instruction on piety and holiness, because Socrates still has no idea what Euthyphro was talking about. Now, when I read this for the first time, I was actually a bit frustrated. I couldn't figure out why Euthyphro would so easily let his argument get turned on its head. He had to have seen Socrates leading him to this conclusion. The best that I could figure was that Euthyphro never really cared at all about defining what makes something holy. He only cared that he himself was in the right, and he did so by convincing himself that the gods were on his side. And this was where everything started to click for me, because that's exactly the conclusion that Socrates wanted anyone watching the discussion or reading this dialogue to think. Now, bear in mind what a fool Euthyphro must have felt like as he walked away from Socrates, how humiliated he felt, and remember that this is basically what Socrates did every day, all day, for decades. It gives you some decent insight into the mindset of the jury in Apology, the next selection from the reading.